Good morning. I am Darrell Boffman, Executive Director of Public Affairs for Frederick County Public Schools. I would like to welcome everyone to our annual Central Office Veterans Day program. At this time, will the audience please rise for the presentation of the colors and remain standing through the national anthem, which will be performed by Ariana Conacher, as well as the Pledge of Allegiance.
Colors. Halt. Left turn. March. Present. Colors.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Carry. Colors. Ready. Cut. Right turn. March. Forward. March. Colors. Halt. Order. Close. Right. Cut.
Please be seated. On the 11th month of the 11th day, at the 11th hour, hostilities during one of the most cataclysmic human events drew to a close. The Great War, or World War I, witnessed the mobilization of more than 65 million uniformed troops and inflicted astronomical casualties exceeding 37 million. Though the United States entered the conflict near its end, we did not escape unscathed. 4.3 million Americans served during the war. 116,000 given the last full measure of devotion in their service to our nation. Much has happened in our history since the Great War. Sadly, World War I was not the war to end all wars. The world saw yet another catastrophic conflict only a few decades later, and many others since. Though this day was originally commemorated as Armistice Day, and intended to honor those who fought in World War I. At the urging of veterans, Congress changed the name of the holiday in 1954 from Armistice Day to Veterans Day, a day that pays tribute to all of our nation's veterans, living and deceased, who served in wartime and peace, at home and abroad. Veterans Day, however, is not a solitary holiday for the United States. Britain, Canada, Australia, and France share its observing the service of their veterans on this day. Drawing strength from our collective experiences, we pause on November 11th every year to honor the service and sacrifices of so many. At this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Brad Young, President of Frederick County Board of Education. Brad Young will provide comments on behalf of the board. Mr. Young.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's indeed an honor to be here on behalf of the board today. I did want to recognize that the majority of our board is here today. We have Vice President Schaefer, Mr. Beninsky, Mr. Mason, Mrs. Yoho, and Dr. Jarman in attendance as well today. While Veterans Day is a day where we celebrate those who have served our great country over the years, it is only that a special day because we should and always honor our veterans every day. And today is, or actually it'll be on Monday, will be the actual day where we give the formal celebration. Yesterday I was honored to go down to Oakdale High School where they do an annual Veterans Day presentation, and they actually had members of the armed service there from every conflict from World War II to present. And again, to watch the students interact with the folks and really with the folks that were there from World War II and some of the older ones and hear about what they had to go through and to hear how lucky our students today are to be able to do the things that we do thanks to the service of our veterans over those years. When I grew up, it was in a kind of peaceful time in our country at the end of the Cold War in the early 1980s. And so while military service at that point wasn't something that I chose to pursue, it was something that I always had great respect for. My uncle joined the Marines, and I went to his graduation at Camp Lejeune, or actually at Paris Island, and then he went to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. And he served in the Marines for many years, and to this day, he's very loyal to the Marines. You'll see him down on first Saturdays raising money for the Marine Corps League. So again, it's something that I have great respect for, and I know our board does. Our organization is so lucky to have so many great people, from our administrators to our teachers to our support staff, that bring many great and diverse skills to the organization. But we're particularly proud and honored to have the many veterans that we have throughout all those workforces that bring a different perspective to our students that they can read in a book, but they can't actually experience unless they actually hear it from somebody that's been through it. Today we're going to hear from Colonel Furr and his great experience that he's had, and we need to take more opportunity to make our students have exposure to actually folks that have actually fought for our country, because it is something, again, that can be learned by reading, but is much more impactful when it's experienced by hearing somebody that was actually there. So again, on behalf of the board, we extend our great admiration, respect for all our veterans that are serving, that have served and are still serving our country, because I know many of our employees are still serving through National Guard and reserves and other areas. We thank you for what you're doing for our country, what you've done for our country, and most importantly, bringing that back and delivering that and helping our students learn and grow from that. Thank you very much.
So we have a new addition to our program this year, a special musical selection of the Navy hymn, Eternal Father, Strong to Save. It will be performed by Isabella Marchina on violin, Eli Torre on viola, Julian Feiertag on cello. After their performance, Superintendent Dr. Teresa Alden will share her Veterans Day message.
Please join me in thanking all of our student guests, from our color guard to our vocalists to our trio here, string trio, for adding a very special touch to this year's celebration. Thank you, students, so much. Sacrifice, service, courage. What are the words that you recall when you think about our nation's veterans? On this special day when we honor those who have served our country, I hope we not only reflect and recognize the contributions of our veterans, but also consider our own role in preserving the values that define our nation. It is hard for me to imagine the horror of war or the impact that experience can have on a person's life. And yet millions of brave men and women have faced that horror to defend our freedom and our democratic ideals. We can never repay the debt we owe them. We must always thank and honor them. That is the service we can provide. As noted by George Washington, the willingness with which our young people are likely to serve in any war, no matter how justified, shall be directly proportional to how they perceive veterans of early wars were treated and appreciated by our nation. Gratitude, appreciation, support, respect. That is how we can serve our veterans, not just today, but every day. I believe we also owe it to our veterans to defend the ideals which they fought for, the values that define our American democracy. In a country deeply divided by political rhetoric, may I suggest we honor our veterans by listening to the wisdom of an American veteran whose life exemplified service to our country. John McCain said, "Our shared values define us more than our differences, and acknowledging those shared values can see us through our challenges today if we have the wisdom to trust in them again." As we thank and honor our veterans today, I ask each of us to reflect on the values that created this amazing nation. Make a commitment to model those values, to reaffirm those values, and to uphold those values that our veterans sacrificed to maintain. This is how we can all serve our country. May we think of freedom not as the right to do as we please, but as the opportunity to do what is right. I hope these words from Peter Marshall become a call to service for each of us. To all of the veterans who now serve FCPS, I offer my unending gratitude and appreciation for your service. To all American veterans, I thank you for my country and the opportunity to do what is right in service to the democratic ideals and values for which you served. At this time, we would like to pause and salute all of our veterans. First, let us recognize those who are with us for our program today, and so I ask that the veterans in the audience please stand so we can applaud you. And now, please join me in honoring our system veterans who are highlighted in our annual Veterans Day video.
about you, veterans, but I am truly proud to be able to serve yet again with my fellow veterans in the success of the students of Frederick County Public Schools and the Frederick community. Thank you all. In 2017, Frederick County Public Schools launched a new systemic award, the Veteran in Education Service Award. The purpose of this annual recognition is to honor an FCPS employee who has served our nation in the armed forces and continues to serve by providing exemplary service to Frederick County Public Schools and the community. The Veteran in Education Service Award is sponsored through the generosity of Woodsboro Bank. Today, Mr. Chris Clemens, Vice President of Woodsboro Bank, is with us to help in the recognition of all award nominees. I would like to invite Mr. Clemens to say a few words, and President Young, Dr. Albin, and Dr. Marco to come forward for the recognition of nominees at the conclusion of Mr. Clemens' remarks. Mr. Clemens. Thank you, sir.
Good, not technically afternoon yet, but part of my favorite part of the job here at the bank is to recognize the contributions of folks in the community that we serve, and particularly so the contributions of our veterans. It's something that my colleagues and I are very passionate about and sincerely appreciative of. So watching the video just now, it was truly eye-opening to see the number of veterans that have continued their service to the youth in the community by signing on with the school system. So my heartfelt thanks, and the thanks of the bank as well. So with that, I will step aside here and allow us to recognize the nominees.
It is truly a privilege to have this opportunity to recognize the service of these dedicated FCPS employees. Would each nominee please come forward when I read your name and remain in the front of the room? We ask the audience to hold applause until all nominees have been read. Miss Pamela Adams Campbell, Literacy Specialist, Catoctin High School, U.S. Marine Corps. Miss Melanie Baldwin, Physical Education Teacher, Urbana Middle School, U.S. Army. Mr. Kevin J., User Support Specialist, Brunswick Elementary School, U.S. Army. Mr. Paul Lebo, Chief Operating Officer, Frederick County Public Schools, U.S. Army. Mr. Perry Lewis, Jr., Lead Custodian, West Frederick Middle School, U.S. Navy. Miss Lisa Martell, English Learner Mathematics Teacher, Frederick High School, U.S. Army. And Mr. Isaac Patterson, Instructional Assistant, Tuscarora High School, U.S. Air Force. Please join me in thanking each of our nominees for their continued service to our community. Family, friends, colleagues, come on up. Take your pictures from the front. We will pause for that photo op.
Come up here so you can get a better picture.
Let's give them another round of applause. Our committee has worked diligently to select one of these nominees as our Veteran in Education Service Award recipient. Clearly, this is an arduous task, as each of these nominees is incredibly deserving. We hope you will join us at the Board of Education meeting on November 25th, when our recipient will be honored. We thank all of our employees for their dedication to our community, and especially thank our veterans who have continued their call to service through their work with FCPS. And in case you were wondering, yes, our board will do anything to get higher ratings for their meetings. So you'll just have to wait. What a teaser. So it is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Paul Furr, principal of Middletown Middle School, to the podium so that he can introduce our very special guest. Mr. Furr?
Thank you, Dr. Alban. My father's always said that his service to his country produced all the great and wonderful things in his life. We always grew up knowing that. So thank you to all the veterans who work within Frederick County and beyond. And it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce my hero and my father, John Furr. John Furr was born in San Pedro, California, the son of Italian and Croatian parents. He attended both Catholic and public high schools, graduating from San Pedro High School. He attended the University of Southern California for 3 years and then the United States Air Force Academy. Upon graduation from the academy in 1962, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. My father moved on to pilot training, where he flew B-47 jet bombers in the Strategic Air Command, standing nuclear alert both in the United States and overseas. As the Vietnam War expanded, he transitioned to the EB-66C and was deployed to Thailand to fly electronic surveillance and countermeasure missions over North Vietnam. It was on his 54th mission over the North on February 4th, 1967, while flying in a highly defended area near Hanoi, that he was shot down by surface-to-air missiles and became a prisoner of the North Vietnamese communists for more than 6 years. As a POW, he lived in the same rooms and camps with many brave and talented POWs, such as Senator John McCain, Senator Jeremiah Denton, Texas Congressman Sam Johnson, as well as Medal of Honor recipients Bud Day and Leo Thorsness. Excuse me. Learning firsthand what leadership under adverse conditions required of an individual. He served on the commander's clandestine communications team, whose task it was to transmit the directives and instructions for resistance for the senior ranking officer to all the POWs, often at great risk of torture or other punishments. At the same time, he served as one of the room chaplains to conduct Sunday services for the other POWs. My father was released on March 4th, 1973, and returned home. After recuperating, he attended Command and Staff College, following which he resumed his flying career in the F-111 fighter airplane. Later, he served in many staff positions, most notably as the principal advisor to the Secretary of Defense for POW and MIA affairs in the Pentagon, and as the chief of the European Field Office to oversee the implementation of the INF Treaty signed by President Ronald Reagan and Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev, a treaty to eliminate intermediate range and short range missiles in Europe. After 28 years, my father completed military service, but he did not retire to take up recreational sports. Instead, he continued to give his country by teaching history and government, followed by a 14-year career as a Catholic elementary school principal in California and South Carolina. My father holds 2 master's degrees, one in political science from Auburn University, and the other in educational administration from the University of South Carolina. He and my mother have 3 children: John, a Foreign Service officer with the Department of State; myself, a middle school principal here in the great city of Frederick; and my sister Teresa, an early childhood education teacher. My mother and father presently reside in Frederick, Maryland. And so it is my great honor if you would help me in welcoming my father and my hero, Colonel John Furr, United States Air Force.
You all don't believe all that stuff, do you, about me? Huh? If you don't mind, I won't take much time past your lunch hour, but I'm a great one to believe in anecdotes as lesson teachers and personal relationships, whether the conversation and the exchange of ideas is spoken or unspoken, from other people. I believe that only by opening your eyes and keeping your ears tuned do you really learn how to navigate your way through difficult times in life. And we've had a lot of difficult times in my lifetime in this country. And Dr. Alban has pointed out circuitously, in a way, that we do and still do have some challenges ahead of us. I would be remiss, too, if I didn't use one of my anecdotal remarks to recognize Paul Lebo over here, because our daughter, Teresa, Paul's sister, is married to Stephen Lebo, spelled the same way, except that he's a Marine and Paul is former Army. And as a segue, let me please say, particularly to those of the Vietnam era, welcome home to all the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps personnel that served during that time period. As a released POW, my homecoming was a great buildup that was, I want to say, created because of the conflict between the communist Vietnamese and the American negotiators to end the war. We placed a great deal of value on the POWs. They knew we were being mistreated, but America places a great deal of value on its service personnel, whether in combat or in peacetime. So this creation came about because the communists knew how valuable Americans are to the country, and so dragged their feet and came up with all sorts of excuses to solve the war peacefully by holding us hostage. And I say that not with any sort of egotism or any self-worth or anything. I just happened to be there at that time, and the negotiators wrestled with this question about an honorable return for the POWs. So I was the beneficiary of a lot of adulation, a lot of, you might say, showmanship by certain people. A lot of it was in the newspapers. There were a lot of attention was placed on the returned POWs. Unfortunately, the people down south in the jungles that were slogging through all that muck and mire and being shot at and being harassed day after day after day, whether it was for 1 year or not, and that was the rule. You served a year and had an opportunity to come home. Whether it was that or not, it was still a situation over which those that were down south, those that fought down there, or offshore in the Navy or the Coast Guard, didn't have an opportunity to share in the welcome home. Okay? And so that's why I want to, from the bottom of my heart, once again say, welcome home to those people, because they certainly deserved it. They certainly deserved it. I would like to move on by thanking, of course, Dr. Albin for being here today and her kind words, Dr. Marco, and Mr. Young, and Chris Clemens from the bank, who I was here the last, or 2 years ago, when I was proud to be present for that same sort of recognition. The experience I had, the experience I had in prison was immensely gratifying in the sense of the relationships that I was able to establish that Paul pointed out with Medal of Honor winners in the same cell, but especially John McCain. Dr. Albin quoted a very, very good statement by John, and I learned from him many, many things. So we served in the same cell, and I think the most important thing I took away from our relationship, and he reiterated each time I saw him when he was out signing his books, or if I happened to drop into the office, was that we ought to, as Americans, but particularly as the military, dedicate ourselves to serve a cause which is greater than our own self-interest. I think John did that. He very nearly died from being shot down, and by sheer strength, courage, and help by other POWs, Bud Day, one of the Medal of Honor winners, he did survive, and he came home and served admirably. Sadly, he's passed away. So anyway, I just want to say again that it's been my pleasure to serve this country, this great country. And I, parenthetically, let me say too, that if you interview employers, they will tell you that those individuals who come to them seeking employment are very qualified to articulate verbally, to follow orders, and when in responsible positions, to give meaningful orders themselves. They're prepared. They're prepared to take their place in society once they put the uniform aside. So, we're going to move now to the table to my left. There are still, I would ask you to think, as I read the narrative here, which my good friend Colleen, where's Colleen Bernard? There she is. She puts, every year she puts together a wonderful scripted program. To remember, there's still nearly 1,500 people unaccounted for from Vietnam. There are many, many more than that from the Second World War and also from Korea. And we're constantly, no country in my estimation, makes such an extraordinary effort to account for all of its missing military. We are dedicated to people in this country, particularly those that serve in uniform, okay? So we still have nearly 1,500 in Vietnam, but we have many, many more in Korea and and from the Second World War throughout the world. For those who served and those currently serving in the armed forces of the United States, we're ever mindful that the sweetness of enduring peace has always been tainted by the bitterness of personal sacrifice. We are compelled to never forget that while we enjoy our daily pleasures, there are others who have endured and may still be enduring the agonies of pain, deprivation, and internment. Before we end our program today, we will pause to recognize our prisoners of war and our missing in action. We call to your attention the small table to my left, which occupies the place of dignity and honor. It is set for one, symbolizing the fact that members of our armed forces are missing from our ranks. We call them POWs and MIAs. We call them comrades. They are unable to be with their loved ones and families today, so we join together to pay a humble tribute to them and bear witness to their continued absence. This table set for one is small, symbolizing the frailty of one prisoner alone against his or her oppressors. The tablecloth is white, symbolic of the purity of their intentions to respond to their country's call to arms. The single red rose in the vase signifies the blood they have shed to ensure the freedom of our beloved United States of America. The rose also reminds us of the family and friends who keep the faith while awaiting their return. The yellow ribbon in the vase represents those who demand a final accounting of our comrades who are not among us today. The slice of lemon on the plate reminds us of their bitter fate. The salt, when sprinkled on the plate, reminds us of the countless fallen tears of families as they wait. The glass is inverted. They cannot toast with us this day. The chair is empty. They are not here. The candle is reminiscent of the light of hope, which lives in our hearts to illuminate their way home, away from their captors and into the open arms of a grateful nation. Let us remember them and never forget their sacrifices. May we be ever vigilant of their sacrifices and strive to bring them home.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Representative Dan Lipinski said, "On the battlefield, the military pledges to leave no soldier behind. As a nation, let it be our pledge that when they return home, we leave no veteran behind. Let us dedicate ourselves to ensuring that every veteran is valued, their families supported, and the democratic ideals for which they served and sacrificed are preserved." This concludes our program today. Will all veterans and our guests please make your way to the rear of the room for the cutting of the cake?